Spring dry fly fishing is some of the best fishing of the year, and even though it's been a long winter, those great hatches are right around the corner. The fish are ready to eat, and if you're prepared, you'll be ready to tackle any and all hatches you run into. But how do you know which patterns to buy, and are there any special rigs you need to know about, and how do you convince a fish to eat your fly when there's thousands of other real bugs on the water? Honestly, it's a lot simpler than you might expect. It really just comes down to being prepared for every life cycle stage of the hatch. So, today on Untangled, we'll dive into the details of what you should expect for spring dry fly fishing. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant, back for yet another week of podcasting excellence here at the VFC Institute for Advanced Angling Studies, where we don't give degrees because the learning never stops. And speaking of learning, never stopping, and continually adding to our knowledge base, we got spring dry fly fishing to talk about. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Durant, still February. What the heck are you going on about spring dry fly fishing for? You trying to get me angry that I can't fish it yet? No, I would never do that to you. I would never do that to you. Give me a little bit of credit, folks. I just want you to be ready to go. Yes, I am starting to chomp at the bit as well to get out and do some spring dry fly fishing. We didn't have much of a real winter this year in Wyoming or anywhere in the Rockies, really. So I don't have that same level of cabin fever, but I do want to go out and get some nice dry fly fishing because there's just nothing that beats it. And the spring hatches, they're great. So I'm right there with you. I'm ready to go, and I want to be prepared because I was taking a look at my fly boxes the other day, and it is not a pretty sight. They're in a bad way. I need to actually sit down and tie some dadgum flies for once. Oh, so as we get into March, though, I know it's the end of February, but as March comes into us, we are going to start seeing these hatches begin, and you need to be prepped and ready to tackle these. So I'm going to give you the lowdown today on the spring hatches that you need to be prepped for, depending on where you live. And yes, to our Midwest and East Coast listeners, I will address hatches that happen in your neck of the woods as well. I'm not going to leave y'all out of the fray. I know we talk about the blue-winged olives and the PMDs and the caddis and stoneflies, sort of stuff that's all over. There's not as many stoneflies out east as there are here in the west. They're out there. There's just not as many. But I am going to talk about like Hendricksons for a minute to give the East Coast folks a little bit of love. So there's stuff in here that is going to be applicable to where you're fishing, I promise. Now, before we get into the specific hatch timing and all of those details of when this bug's going to come off and when you should be looking for it, there are a few things we got to talk about from a general knowledge perspective with spring fly fishing, because regardless of where you live, whether you're West Coast, East Coast, Rockies, Midwest, there are some ground rules for spring dry fly fishing that you've got to know and you've got to understand in order to be successful with it. No matter if you're fishing Hendricksons or if you're fishing blue-winged olives, this is stuff that is going to matter, is going to make a difference for you out there on the water. So the first thing that you have got to be aware of and to keep in mind is all about life cycle stages. We talked about this right at the very beginning of the show, but this time, I think more than any other time of the year, fish can get really keyed in on a certain life cycle stage. You show up to the river one day, you're fishing, and the trout just might want the emerger all day long. Doesn't matter. There's a million duns on the surface. They don't care. They just want the emerger all day. And they just woke up, and it's like that day, I wake up and think, garlic parm wings sound good today. And buffalo's great, and I go for it 90% of the time, but every now and then I switch it up. I go garlic parm or something like that. That might be the same thing the fish did. They woke up, they were just in a different mood for whatever reason. Then you might get to a hatch, there's tons of duns on the surface, and the fish are eating them. So that's kind of easy. You can go through that, say, oh, all right, I just need the adult. Other times, the whole hatch might progress, and it might be okay, there might be a decent amount of fish up, but you're going to watch them really go nuts towards the spinner fall. When they've mated and died and they're falling back to the river, that might be what gets the most action going on any given day. So your job as an angler is to be prepared to fish all those different life cycle stages, because you never know what exactly the fish are going to be keyed in on until you're there and you're into the hatch. Now, for those who don't know what I'm talking about when I throw out all those terms, your aquatic insects all follow a very similar life cycle. They start out underwater as a pupa, and that's that's the nymph version, right? Our nymphs imitate the pupal form of a lot of these aquatic insects. Then when they're ready to grow up, they're ready to tie their own tie for the first time. They're driving a Ford while the rest of the family's Chevy truck people. They're going their own way. They're charting their own path in life. When they're ready to do that, they enter the emerger stage. It's where they're starting to transform into the adult bug that you're going to see buzzing around in the air. That emerger stage moves up from the bottom of the river where all the nymphs live, moves up to the surface so it can sprout its wings, hatch, fly around, find a mate, and make more bugs, right? That adult version, we call that the dun. That's going to be, those big bugs that you see flying around all the time. And then the spent wing or the spinner, once they have mated, they've laid their eggs, the bugs die. It's kind of tragic. They just, their whole goal is propagate the species, and then they're done. And then they'll spin and fall back to the river's surface. And when they're dead and just kind of crumpled up on the surface, that's easy pickings for the fish. So the fish realize that. They recognize that those bugs can't escape them, and they really like to eat during the spinner fall. So that's those life cycle stages. And the biggest key to your success, more than anything else this time of year, it's not necessarily having the right pattern. It's having the right life cycle stages. Okay? It's having enough that represents, here's my emerger, here's my adult, here's my cripple, here's my nymph. Having all of those on hand, so whatever the fish are keying in on, whatever stage of the hatch they're eating at any given time, you have the bugs in your box to represent that. Now, sometimes it does get very pattern specific. If you're on a highly pressured tailwater, a place where the fish see thousands of flies, sometimes you do need a very specific emerger or a very specific dun. But even then, you can kind of get away with, going a little outside the box. What I mean by that is one of my favorite rivers. It's probably one of the top 5 most fished rivers in America. And especially during the blue-winged olive hatch, it just gets slammed. Everybody's there. Everybody and their dog and their dog's dog shows up to this river during the blue-wing hatch. And there will be a lot of days with, a couple hundred anglers on the whole stretch of river. Those fish are seeing bajillions of flies, and there's also a bajillion real ones on the surface. And at that point, it can almost help to unmatch the hatch a little bit. So what I'll do is we'll throw, if all the blue wings on the surface are like a size 16, then I'll throw a size 14 purple haze. Now I go that way because the purple haze, it's just a purple parachute atoms. It is the same shape as all the other bugs that are out there. It is a mayfly shape. There's no doubting that. That's what it looks like. But it's a little bit bigger. It's got a different color. So it stands out amongst all the other ones. And it doesn't look exactly like all the other flies folks have been fishing that day. So that's enough to grab the fish's attention, make them notice it, which is one of the big hurdles in these spring hatches. Sometimes there's so many bugs on the water that it's almost impossible for them to recognize your fly. So you throw this slightly larger one that's still the same shape, still a mayfly imitation, just bigger, different color. It grabs their attention. They'll come over to it. And I've had banner days with flies like that because it's just different enough. They feel a lot more confident eating it. And then it's a little bit bigger. So they think, oh, sweet, this is one of the bigger mayflies that hatched today. I'm going to eat that because that's more calories. That's a better use of my energy and my time is to eat that one versus a bunch of the smaller ones. So you can get away with doing things like that, and it can be very beneficial. But I always err on the side of matching very closely as I can first. And then if the fish are refusing that, and I've made sure my presentation's perfect, and we'll get into presentation here in a minute, But if I've done everything else well, that's when I'll start switching to those other flies. I don't go to those right off the bat. I go to my exact matches first, and then I change if the conditions and the fish tell me that I need to. So make sure that you've got emergers, make sure you've got duns, make sure you've got spent wings. And then I also have a ton of cripples as well. Cripples are exactly what they sound like. They're just a crippled version of the adult. Sometimes when these bugs hatch, they don't always hatch perfectly. So they're changing from an emerger into an adult, and sometimes their legs are broken or their wings are bent or something else is wrong with them, and they can't really escape the surface. They're just laying there and they look a little broken, a little crippled. A lot of times fish will love to eat those ones because, again, they see that as a food source that has less of a chance of escaping them. So eating that is a better use of their energy and resources than eating the fully formed dun that could fly away from them before they go up to eat it. So having all of those on hand in your box is going to do wonders for your success in these hatches. Make sure you've got the complete life cycle of anything that you might run into on the water. And again, we'll get into specific hatches here in a bit, but make sure you've got those life cycle stages represented. And that's the number one key. Now, the second important thing to have in mind, keep in mind, general knowledge-wise about this, is water conditions. Okay? You are doing all of this spring dry fly fishing. You're catching these fish in essentially the same water that we've been fishing all winter, which is low, clear, and that means spooky fish, right? Now, the fish are rising, but that doesn't mean that they've just completely let go of all their survival instincts. They're still going to be doing it when they feel the safest. They're going to love the overcast days when the light is low because that makes them feel very confident in rising. They're not going to want to rise as much on the bright sunny days. Those overcast cloudy days are really going to be your best spring dry fly days. But with that in mind, it is important to continue to treat it a lot like winter fishing, where you want to stay as far back from the fish as possible. You want to stay as low as possible so you don't spook them. And, you know, when you're when you eat too many wings like I do, sometimes staying low and staying far back is a little tough because it's hard to hide your bulk on the stream side if you're me. But kidding aside, I do a lot of kneeling this time of year. I'll just kneel in the river, kneel on the bank, and it's just getting lower by a few feet like that increases how close you can get to the fish, because what's really going to spook those trout is some giant looming on the horizon suddenly. Now, you think to yourself, you're out there in the woods, you're just chilling, and all of a sudden you look on the ridge up to your left or something, and there's Sasquatch standing there. You're going to crap yourself, you're going to run, and you're going to scream, "Oh my goodness, I found it! It's Sasquatch, it's real!" And then you're going to forget to take the video because, or you'll take the video and it's all going to be blurry because even though it's 2026, we can't get crystal clear footage of Sasquatch, which, I think that's one of Sasquatch's powers, right? It's really actually just blurry, and that's what's terrifying about it. No, but point remains, right? Seeing something like that suddenly up on the ridge, that's going to spook you. Seeing something that's like half the size that just kind of slowly moves up on the ridge, you might think, oh, is that a bear? Is that a coyote? Is that a wolf? Whatever. Be a little bit more interesting. Okay, it's not going to spook you as much. You're going to feel a bit more comfortable with that. Fish are going to be the same way. Okay. Now, third thing that we've got to focus on, again, applicable all over, no matter where you're fishing, and that is your presentation in the spring is king. You've got to dial in your presentation. You've got to make these. I watch a lot of Chopped, the Food Network show. Me and my wife love it. And it's funny because my wife hates that they grade on presentation so much. You'll get these chefs, they've got 30 minutes to make an entree out of horse hooves, angel hair pasta, and rutabaga or something. They've got to make it taste good. And they'll make something that I would actually eat, which is saying something because I'm relatively picky. Not picky. I just know what I like, right? But they'll go through all that work, they'll make it, and then the judges will be like, oh yeah, this tasted wonderful, but your presentation's just not good, and so we have to kick you off the show. And it bothers my wife and me so much. Like, what, it didn't look pretty enough for you? Well, trout are the same way. If it doesn't look pretty enough for them, if your presentation's not dialed, you're getting chopped. You're going home. You don't get to win the 10 grand that they give away at the end of the show. Okay. Fish, when they ignore your fly, when they refuse your fly, when they don't eat it during the spring, very often it's not because your fly choice is wrong. Now, you might be fishing to fish that's eating an emerger and you're fishing a dun. So in that sense, your fly choice might be wrong because they're just not going to eat the dun. They want the emerger. That's something you'll figure out as you troubleshoot this. But the very first thing to assume is not that the fly is wrong, because we're also going to get into a little bit. Oh, and I completely skipped. I'm so sorry, folks. Let me back up real quick. We're going to talk presentation, but I completely skipped over rise forms when we talked about having the life cycle stages. I was here in my notes, and I just zoomed right past it. I'm sorry. So the way that you can tell if a fish is eating an emerger or a dun is by the way they rise. They're going to move up into the water to eat, and you are going to see them break the surface somehow, and that is called the rise form. And that'll tell you whether they're eating an emerger or whether they're eating the dun. Your dun eats, you're generally going to see the fish's nose break the surface. You're going to see a lot of their head come out of the water, and you're going to watch them go up and go back down with those adult flies in their mouths. If they're smaller fish, that will be a splashier rise. There will be a little bit more noise with it. When they're eating emergers, and even sometimes when they're eating the spinners and spent wings, it's going to be a much softer, much more subtle rise. You very likely won't see their head break the surface at all. What you'll see is you will see a little bit of a ring on the surface, and then you'll see their dorsal fin and their tail fin because they come up, they eat right below or just barely on the surface. They'll just open their mouth right under the surface, suck the fly in, and then they'll go back down. And when they go back down, their dorsal fin and their tail fin break the surface. So if all you're seeing is dorsal and tail fins, very high likelihood that you've got emerger eaters. Tie that on. If you're seeing heads break the surface, splashier rises, a little bit louder ones, very high likelihood that they're eating the adults. Tie that on, and you will be set. Now, bringing us back to presentation, let's assume that you've read the rise form correctly and you have tied on the bug that you think is right. So at that point, there isn't really a whole lot to think that, oh, well, maybe it is eating a merger, maybe it is eating a dry. Okay, have faith in what you observed, have faith in what you watched. Don't think that it's the fly that's the issue first. Almost every time in the spring, when fish are refusing my fly, it is not the fly choice that's the issue, it's how I'm presenting it. And that's true in a lot of fishing, but it's true on a much grander scale during the spring because they just get really picky about how they want these bugs presented to them. I think you've got the low water combination, you've got the clear water combination, you've got generally these mayflies are smaller, so you have a lot less room for error in drag on the water, and then they don't move a whole lot on the water. They'll flutter and skitter around a little bit when they try to get their wings off, but they really do float the stillest or the most still out of all the aquatic insects. Caddis move around a lot. Stoneflies definitely move around a lot. Midges buzz a little bit, but your mayflies really do just kind of float in a lot of instances. So you really have to get a good looking drift. So I wouldn't consider the issue being my fly. I would always consider it being presentation first. And the biggest culprit in a presentation issue is using tippet that's too thick. Because if you use tippet that's too thick, it's going to cause micro drag. It's going to pull just ever so slightly on your flies, and that is going to pull the fly ever so slightly out of a natural drift and into something that the fish will realize is, hey, that ain't real. And Bob, look, yeah, guy's using 4X. He should be using 5. You believe that? What an idiot. Doesn't he have any respect for us and our intelligence? No, I don't know, Steve. It sure doesn't seem like it, does it? You don't want the fish talking like that about you under the water. You want them respecting you like, oh, dude, look at that's a good, I'm going to eat that. That's a beautiful drift right there. That's the kind of dialogue you want among the fishes down there. Okay. So I will always size my tippet down first to make sure I'm getting a drag-free drift and make sure that I'm landing that fly right in the feeding lane. The fish in the spring, I've found they do not want to move as far for their food. You really do need to land it right where the fish are eating. You can't go a foot to the left or a foot to the right. Usually they're not going to move that far for it. It's got to be right in their lane. So size your tippet down. Make sure that you are landing where it needs to go. And then what this really looks like in practical terms for me is I will usually start my day of spring fishing with a 9-foot 4X leader, and then I'll tie 2 feet of 5X onto the end of that with a blood knot. You can use the sturgeon's knot too. I just prefer the blood. That's what I've always used. And I'll attach my mayflies to the end of that. Now, if I fish it and I feel like I've got presentation well, I don't have any drag, I'm putting it right in front of the fish, and they're still ignoring it, this is one of the only times of the year that I will actually add some more tippet and size down again. So I'll add 2 feet of 6X tippet to that and make that cast. And if the fish are still refusing it, even after I've added the 6X, I've sized down, made sure my presentation's good. If they're still saying no, that's when I'll think about a fly change. That's when I'll think, okay, well, maybe I misread that rise form. Maybe they actually are eating the emergers or the duns or whatever it is. Or maybe I need to go smaller on my fly size. Maybe I need to go larger on my fly size. That's when I will start tweaking and troubleshooting and trying to figure that aspect of it out. Okay. And then the last thing to touch on before we move into the flies themselves is I do like to fish a double dry fly rig during these hatches, or a 2-fly rig in general, a smaller dry dropper. If I show up to the river before the hatch really kicks on, which a lot of these spring mayfly hatches kind of come off anywhere from about 9 to noon, they'll start, and they'll last till about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So if I get there before anything's really going on, then I'll fish a dry dropper with a nymph picked to imitate the emerger state of an insect. I'll fish that kind of down off the bottom, maybe a little bit higher in the water column, just try and attract those fish that are looking up because they're expecting that hatch to happen. You can swing wet flies, soft tackles this time as well to trigger those fish that they know the hatch is coming. They're looking up. Those can be a very effective fly to fish this time as well. But then once the bugs start hatching, my favorite rig is an adult version of the flies that I'm targeting first. So if I'm in a blue-winged olive hatch, I'll have like a size 16 parachute blue-winged olive tied onto the end of my leader. And then I'll put about 18 inches of tippet on that. And that's where I will throw my emerger or my cripple or whatever else I want behind that larger dry fly. So I'm fishing 2 flies at once. I'm able to fish to the fish that are eating the duns and the ones that are eating the emergers, because even within the same pod of rising fish, you might have some that are only eating the emergers and others that are only eating the dries. They can get really picky like that sometimes. It's very interesting to watch them do that. But I just like to offer both. It gives me a great way to continue to troubleshoot and refine what the fish are eating, what they like, what they don't like. If I'm really worried about drag, if I'm really worried about the best presentation possible, I will cut off that second fly and just go single fly. But that's for really picky fish and really pressured waters. Most of the time, I don't need to do that. So that's your information about rigs, your fly selection, what you need to have on hand. Let's actually get into the flies themselves. Which hatches should you be prepping for? And if you want a hard copy of all this information about the hatches that we're going to talk about, we actually have all of it in our year-round hatch chart. It's a free resource. It just tells you when and where these bugs should hatch. That way you don't have to memorize it. If you want to rewatch the show like a million times so you've got it downloaded, I wouldn't hate that. I'm never going to tell you not to watch the show, right? But the hatch chart, it's very handy. You download it right to your phone. You can reference it whenever and wherever. I'll throw a link to that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And we're going to start with the hatches that are largely regional. We have hatches that happen in certain areas, and then we have hatches that happen all across the country. So we're going to start with the East Coast hatches to begin with. And this is not meant to be exhaustive. I'm sure there are a lot of smaller types of hatches and bugs that come off in areas that, are just lesser known about. I'm just trying to paint with some broad strokes here and give you guys a lot of good stuff to jump off with. Okay. The first thing to think and to keep in mind is the winter black stone. So these have been hatching throughout the winter in a lot of places out east, but throughout March, you can really expect the winter black stoneflies to finish up their importance on the trout menu. They're going to be the star of the show for just a little bit longer. If you want to imitate the nymphs, a prince nymph is a great way to go, fishing a little bit smaller sizes. And then a smaller chubby Chernobyl or even a royal flush is a great pick to imitate the adult. You can go with those. Your next fly that you're going to be on the lookout for is the Quill Gordon. Now, these are a larger mayfly, and they're going to start coming off mid to late March, depending on where you live. Okay, that's going to change if you're further south towards the Smokies, if you're further north towards Pennsylvania and New York. There's going to be a little bit of give and take on this timing, but generally you're going to see these coming off about mid-March. Okay, pheasant tails and Frenchies are pretty decent nymph imitations for the Quill Gordon, but for the adults, the fish can get kind of picky during the Quill Gordon hatch. So getting exact Quill Gordon matches in your box from local fly shops can be a huge game changer for you in terms of success. So definitely, pay attention to the local patterns. Go out and see what you can find. You will see these Quill Gordons. I said they are larger mayfly. Sizes 14 to 10 are pretty common with the Quill Gordons. And then really once the water temps hit about 50 degrees for a few days in a row, that's when they're going to start hatching, and they're going to be out in enough numbers that the fish are going to start taking notice. Okay? After the Quill Gordon, you're going to have the blue quills coming off, and these are also a mayfly. They come off at a pretty similar time to the Quill Gordons, but they're a little bit smaller mayfly than the Quill Gordons. These are 16s, 18s, much more similar in size to blue-winged olives. The blue quills, they've got this reddish-brown body, so you could use Parachute Adams, Purple Haze to imitate the adults. But again, I would go and look for exact imitations for these as well, because these are the hatches that really made American dry fly fishing famous, right? The quills, the Quill Gordons, the Hendricksons, which is the next one on the list. So getting patterns that are tied specifically to imitate them can be very useful for you, especially if you're fishing water that gets fished by a lot of other anglers. Okay. And we mentioned Hendricksons. These really don't start coming off until mid to late April. And for a lot of anglers, this is the first big mayfly hatch a lot of them fish throughout the year. They are most common out east, especially in the Catskills and then down in the Smokies. Hendricksons are going to be going nuts, but there's pockets of them out in the Midwest. I've even seen a few Hendrickson hatches all the way out in the West in some places too, but they're really prevalent out there in the East. They're a really big mayfly. The popular red quill pattern represents the male adult Hendrickson. So if you ever see the red quill pattern out there for sale, it's imitating the male adult Hendrickson. Again, a Parachute Adams is a great all-around imitation for the Hendrickson, but these are another one of those flies where I would recommend getting specific patterns along with the emerger patterns for them that are tied to imitate the Hendricksons, because it's one of those storied hatches. It's one of those big deals. You really want to make sure you're imitating it to the best of your ability. Okay? So that's what you're going to see out east for your spring hatches. Now we move out to the west, and the big spring hatch out here, aside from stuff that hatches everywhere, is going to be the Skwalas stonefly. You're going to get these March, early April. They're a little bit bigger than winter black stones. They're about 10 to 14s. About 14s on the small end, but 10s and 12s are very common sizes. You get a lot of these in Montana, Washington, and Oregon. It's going to be where a lot of your squala activity happens. And it could be some amazing early season dry fly fishing. I've been in on a few squala hatches, and it's funny because there's not a ton of them on the water, and they're not really scooching around a bunch, but the fish know they're there, and the fish will eat them, and it's fun. It's some really great. It's a great way to wake out a winter with the squala hatch coming off. You could use Prince Nymph, Pheasant Tail to imitate the nymphs if you want to, and then chubby Chernobyls, Royal Flushes to imitate the adults. Again, about a size 12 is a pretty good rule of thumb for squalas. Now, that's with all the regional hatches that I wanted to touch on. Again, I'm sure there's plenty more. I'm trying to paint with some broad strokes here so we can all take something from this. But now we've got the rest of the hatches that are going to happen during the spring that are going to happen no matter where you live or where you fish within the lower 48. You're going to see these bugs. And the number one that we're going to see the most of is the blue-winged olive, right? These are tiny. They love to hatch when it's cloudy, slightly rainy, and the fish go nuts for them. They love blue-winged olives, especially on tailwaters. They are small, but it feels like they hatch by the 100,000. So there's always enough of them for the fish to just go up and eat. And the fish will just gorge themselves on these bugs all the time. When the hatch is coming off, they're going to be eating blue-winged olives. Generally, my blue wing patterns are sizes 16 to 22. 18's the most common that I use. I like a lot of parachute blue-winged olives, some Adams thrown in. Sparkle duns work great for the emergers, last chance cripples as well. And then small pheasant tails are my favorite go-to for the nymphs this time of year as well. Next up is going to be the March brown. This is a larger mayfly. You do see them across the country, but some areas are going to get them in much stronger numbers than others. My local creek gets a ton of March browns, and then the streams that I grew up fishing in Utah didn't get any. So it really can be kind of regionally dependent. But they'll also come off different times. Not always March. The ones that I get at my place are in like April. Other people might see them at the end of March, but usually you don't see the big hatches that the fish really start to notice until about April is when these will come off. They're a darker brown, just like the name implies. They're roughly about a size 14 down to a 12. They're much bigger than blue-winged olives, so they've got a thicker, stockier body than the blue-winged olives. And a parachute Adam is going to work great to imitate them. Same with specific March brown patterns too. You are going to have midges hatching year-round as well. But during spring, they really can start to go off. You get some nice, thick midge hatches during the spring. And in fact, I've been on trips where the blue wings were hatching and they were thick, and we thought, oh, we're going to get blue wing fishing, and the fish were just eating midges all day. They'll do that sometimes. They'll just, I'm just eating the midge today. That's what I want. Thanks. Appreciate you guys. Bye. That's just how they do it. Now, midges are small. 18s to 24s, 26s are not uncommon. Your Griffiths gnat, your Matt's midges, they're good adult imitations. The Chocolate Thunder, TS midges will imitate some of your other life cycle stages too. But just a lot of different midge patterns on hand. Again, focus on sizes 18 to 24. They do tend to be pretty small. They can be frustrating that way. And then right at the tail end of spring is the last of the flies, and that's going to be the caddis. Now, we usually think of caddis as a summer fly, and that's when a lot of their hatches are the best, but you might start seeing them late April, early May. That's still spring, technically. It's still something to keep in mind that the caddis might start moving towards the end of April, so having your caddis flies tied and ready up to go can be a good way to make sure that you don't miss out on it if you get on the river and run into a surprise caddis hatch, because sometimes they'll just come off at earlier times than others. And again, that's regionally dependent, but you can depend on seeing them end of April, early May in a lot of places. Now, before we move on, you're going to notice I didn't get too super specific with fly recommendations, and I did that for a reason. With these early hatches, especially with the mayflies, there's enough regional variance in a lot of the bugs that I think it's worth tying or buying flies that are local to your region. Because the blue-winged olives in my neck of the woods where I live in Wyoming, they're really dark. They're almost a black-bodied mayfly instead of an olive-bodied mayfly. And then the blue-winged olives down here in Utah, where VFC is headquartered and where we do a lot of our fishing, they're a really light olive. They're a very different color than the ones that I get up in my neck of the woods. So buying or tying flies that cater to your specific needs of your hatch, it's never going to be a bad idea to go ahead and do that. But as far as nymphs go, that's where you have a lot more room to just use a lot of the good old standbys. Okay, your usual stuff like your pheasant tails, even the gunslingers, all the other nymphs that we've got in our fly collections here at VFC, they're going to do good work for you during these mayfly hatches. I've found that they really do get a lot pickier about the dry fly adult than they do about the nymph. So again, your pheasant tail, your gunslinger, your WD-40, your Prince nymph, Those are all going to be fantastic to have on hand for spring hatches. You're definitely going to need them regardless of where you live and where you fish. So I would definitely make sure you've got some of those. We've got a bunch in our fly collections and in our 3-packs. If you're interested in grabbing some of those, I'll throw a link down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast, if you want to really get a jump start on stocking your boxes for spring. And that wraps up everything we need to know for today, anyways, about our spring dry fly hatches. If you've got any more questions, any follow-up, drop a comment, let me know. I'd love to help you out. Make sure we get you squared away and ready to go for spring hatches. But we are now going to move on to the Q&A portion of this week's show, because every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, you go ahead and send those in to us. There's a link to do it down in these show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Phil from Ohio has our first question, writes in and says, my question is concerning the size and type of flies we use today. It seems to me that we lean into smaller and smaller flies these days. I don't remember using as many tiny flies back when I first started fly fishing 40 years ago. I've learned at times a small midge is the way to go, but even then, flies smaller than a 20 seem unusual to me. Have we evolved over the years to using smaller flies first? Are fly patterns in size 16 a thing of the past? Thank you for a great podcast and all you things do, and all the things you do. Ventures Fly Co. is a refreshing asset to the fly fishing community. Phil, good question, and thank you for the kind words. Appreciate it. I think that fly fishing has progressed to the point where small flies are a lot more viable now than they were 40 years ago. My grandpa, he actually used to tie flies commercially, and I've got some of the hooks that he used back in the 80s and the 90s, and he had some size 24 hooks in that collection, and I tied up quite a few flies on them, and most of them would bend out on me in the vise, so I'd go to, put some tension on them with the thread, and they'd bend, or they'd even break in the vise, and I had a few break off in fish after catching one fish. They just weren't very good hooks. I think our modern size 24s are a lot stronger, so in my mind, that's going to play into it quite a bit. We've got better materials now. We can actually make strong, small hooks, so that's definitely something to keep in mind with it. I'd also suggest that, I think more people are fishing now than they did 40 years ago, for sure. That there's no way to argue that. And because of that, the fish generally are just pickier than they used to be. Usually, when you get into really picky fish, that means you're going to need smaller flies to more closely imitate what they're actually eating. Because when you look at the vast majority of a trout's diet, if you've ever pumped a trout's stomach and pulled the flies out of it to see what it was actually eating, most of the bugs in its stomach are tiny. They're eating a lot of really small flies all the time. And I mean, if you want an even easier comparison, just look at the size 14 parachute Adams. Compare that to a real life mayfly. Okay. The mayfly is slimmer. It's smaller. It's a lot more delicate. It doesn't have the bulk. The parachute Adams, it's got a little bit more bulk. It's not as slim. It's got all the hackle on it that sticks out, right? It's a great imitation. It matches size, shape, and color really well, but it's nowhere near as small and as slim and slender as the actual real bug. And you can even see this too play out places like Colorado and Utah, where fly fishing's just exploded in popularity. There's tons of folks who do it. And I joke, if you're a longtime listener to the show, I poke fun at Colorado every now and then because you've got to use size 46 flies and angel hair tippet to catch fish out there. But that's really not far off from the truth, because their fisheries do get a lot of pressure. Those fish are wised up very quickly. So you need your smaller flies. You need your more delicate presentations to get them to eat. That's just kind of the name of the game in a lot of the fisheries out there in Colorado. So I do think that plays into it as well. Now, the flip side to this all is that I do think fly fishing has gotten a bit more technical, and we've developed methods of fishing for people who really want to dive into the weeds on intricate presentations, fine stuff, going down that rabbit hole. I still think larger flies work. I still think they work very well. I mean, last year, I outside of the spring bluing hatch, I don't think I fished a dry smaller than a size 16 all year. Most of my creek fishing is done with like a size 12 or 10 chubby Chernobyl up top with a size 16, 14-ish inch dropper for my nymph. My local creek rarely gets fished. That plays into it as well, but I still catch quite a few fish on flies like that. And just to bring this all back, I do think that we have come to understand more about fish, trout especially, in the last 40 years. And we've come to understand that they do eat, like I said earlier, a lot of small flies, a lot of small bugs. So they can be more effective if you want to catch fish. Sometimes you do got to go smaller because that's a lot of what they're eating. But honestly, though, the folks I fish with, people I talk to and spend time in the water with, I really don't think that we've made a huge change in fly sizes in the last 10, 15 years. I know that in all the time that Alex and I have been running VFC together, most of our flies are in that size 14 to 18 range. Most everything we use falls in that category, and I think that's a reasonably sized fly. So I would say it's perception on what everybody's talking about, not necessarily reality that makes you feel like you have to go smaller because, most of my flies are 14 to 18, and I feel like that's a pretty reasonable. I think once you get below an 18, you can start calling that small. So that's just my 2 cents, though. Really interesting question, though. I appreciate you sending it in. Thank you. Joe from the Midwest has our next question, writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, big fan of the show. I've got a question about river etiquette. I'm a relatively new fly angler, but when I'm not shaking a stick at the river, I work as a game warden. I just moved from a station with mostly spin fishing to a trout paradise. What should I keep in mind when contacting anglers to ensure I don't ruin their cast and spook every trout in the county? So far, the only advice I've been given is to always approach from downstream. Can you share any experiences, good or bad, that you've had with wardens on the rivers? Thanks for all you do. Coke Zero for life and tight lines." Joe, I almost didn't answer this question because of the whole Coke Zero thing, but no, it's a great question, man. Appreciate it. And congrats on the warden gig and getting to a trout fishing paradise. It sounds like it's going to be a great station post to have hanging out in. I love it. I've actually had a lot of wardens check my license, which I find very interesting because I've got quite a few fishing buddies who've never been checked before. So maybe I just look shifty out there on the stream. I don't know what's going on, but I get checked a lot. I do legitimately love the fact that you are asking about how to be respectful about checking anglers, though. Not all game wardens are like that, unfortunately, and I do appreciate that. I mean, one time, Alex and I were out fishing in Nevada, and I was up at the truck on the road re-rigging. I was doing something. Alex had already left, and he was down at the water fishing. And the water is about a quarter mile from the truck, but you could see it. It's flat. It's clear. You could see where Alex was fishing. And the game warden pulls next to the truck. Obviously, he can see I'm fishing. He wants to check my license. No big deal. I hand it to him. We chat for a sec. And then he points at Alex and says, "Is he fishing with you?" I said, "Yeah, he is." It's like, "Oh, I want to check his license." And I said, "Oh, yeah, well, head on down there." And the game warden looks at me and says, "Well, I'm not going down there. He needs to come to me." And I was really taken aback because I'd never had a game warden be that abrasive with me before. So I trudged on down there and I told Alex, said, "Hey, the game warden wants to talk to you." And Alex just rolls his eyes and goes up there. He wasn't happy about it either because, the guy didn't come to him. It just felt really weird that it was almost like this weird power trip of, well, I'm going to make them come to me and they're going to do it my way. He could have just gotten out of the truck and come talk to us, but whatever. So I really appreciate that you're not doing that. I really appreciate that. The big thing for me would just be when I get stopped by wardens, I don't mind it at all. Just make sure you announce yourself early. Holler, say hi, wave, get their attention when you're relatively far away from them where they can still see you. Just, nice friendly wave, make it clear that you want to talk to them, and then wait until they're done casting, until they reel in for you to walk over, because not all fly anglers are as situationally aware as maybe they should be, and they'll keep casting sometimes and hook you, and you don't want to end up doing that. Walk on over to them. As long as you don't walk through the water that they're fishing, it's not going to matter. If they're fishing the run right out in front of them, don't walk it. If they're fishing upstream, there's rising fish next to the bank, skirt around the bank as much as you can. Obviously, part of your job is checking on the anglers. You've got to do that. Don't go so out of your way that you're not doing your job. It's important to enforce the regulations and make sure folks are fishing in accordance to what we've all agreed with, what we all need to do, that we're all doing our part to fund it as well. A lot of funding for habitat and game and fish departments comes from your fishing licenses. A lot of them are actually self-funded. They get very little state money. It's usually in a lot of places it's all funded from license sales. So it's important to have folks out there checking and making sure we're doing it right. So just don't walk through the fish or through the water they're fishing, and I think you'll be in good shape. But again, really appreciate that you're asking that question and that you're putting it out there to us. That makes a huge difference. So again, congrats on the gig. Thank you so much for sending the question on in. Aaron from Utah has our next question, writes in and says, starting with the obligatory worry brown nosing. Love the podcast and videos. I've been fly fishing 3 decades and have still learned so much from you guys. For example, human males, actually drink asphalt water, aka Diet Coke. I always thought that was for middle-aged female secretaries. I love the passion you exude for our little sport. Please do not run out of material. My question is about painting the backside of flies. You have talked about eyesight, and a lot of us have issues with that to the point that watching our dries can be difficult. Problems I did not experience in the mid-90s. What about adding a bit of bright nail polish on the top? As long as it doesn't weigh them down or smell too strong, would that work? I doubt the fish have any kind of bird's eye view to see it, but I'm not sure if it would cause other issues. Thought I would ask the experts. Keep it up, boys. Nothing like fishing the mighty Mississippi Provo River. Aaron, I appreciate the inside jokes there. Thank you. But, that brown nosing, that ain't obligatory, man. Folks do that because they love me. They care about me as a person and an angle. They care about my feelings. And that's why they say these nice things. Not because they have to, not because I won't read their question if it's not stuffed with praise, but because they believe it. No, I really do appreciate all the kind words. Kidding aside, folks, it's awesome that it really is. It's unsolicited too. People just say it, and it touches me. It's very humbling to hear how much you guys enjoy what I do every week. So I appreciate hearing it. I really, truly do. As for the Diet Coke thing, those secretaries, man, I used to teach high school. So I was around a lot of teachers, a lot of secretaries. They know stuff, man. They've got life dialed. They know things. The least that I could pick up from them was a Diet Coke habit, and I'm glad I did because, again, they've got a lot figured out for them. But anyways, let's get on to your question. I really haven't thought about doing that before, to be completely honest with you. I don't know that nail polish would actually last all that long. I don't know how effective it would be. It's certainly going to stiffen up and crackle some of the hackle fibers, and it might create enough of a shell around the top of the fly that floating might not penetrate it. So you might run into an issue there with how well the fly floats at some points. Now, I'm thinking, like worst case scenarios. I have no idea if it's going to do that. This is just what comes to mind as you ask this question. But I don't see any downside to trying it. Try it. You go out, it doesn't work for a day. Okay, well, 2 flies didn't work and the fish didn't cooperate for a day. That's far from the end of the world. I would consider giving it a shot because I think it could end up working out. Because you are right, the fish don't see the top of your fly, so you can get creative with what's on the top of your fly to help you see it. One thing that a lot of anglers do is especially with their parachute flies, is they'll use some bright pink, orange, chartreuse, or yellow yarn for the parachute post to help it stand out on the water, help them see it a little bit more. We actually do that with our Griffiths gnats that we sell in 3-packs here at VFC. We've got a bright pink post in them for that reason, because they're small, they're black and white, they're very hard to see. So we put a bright pink post in the middle of them, helps you see it. The fish don't care because it's on top of the fly. They don't see on top of the fly. We do the same thing with our high-vis beetles. We stick a piece of orange foam on them just to make it stand out on the water, because those small, darker colored ones especially can be really tough to see, even when you haven't been doing it for 30 years like you have. Another option is to use powder floating on your flies. Top ride from the loon is a good example. Helps the flies stand out. It kind of coats them in that white looking powder, but you do have to reapply it pretty regularly. And that is one downside. It doesn't last as long as the gel floatant does. And then another option is to fish 2 dry flies. So you fish a much larger dry fly ahead of the one that you think the fish are going to eat. And then that larger dry fly becomes your cider, becomes your indicator. You can focus on that to find your smaller dry fly behind it, or you can even just watch it, and that big dry fly is going to act almost like an indicator for when the smaller fish eat, or when the fish eats the smaller dry fly that's behind it. Okay, just put about 18 to 24 inches of tippet between the 2 flies. You'll be in business. Now, last thing is, you did say you've been fly fishing for about 30 years, and I don't doubt that at all. But I will say that learning to see flies, even with eyesight that's not as good as it used to be, is still a skill. And just like any skill, the more you do it, the better you're going to become at that skill. Now, if you've fished 50 days a year for 30 years, you're probably seeing those flies just fine. Yeah, you've got some eye issues. You got to figure that part of it out. 100% understand that and respect that. But it is pretty hard for a lot of us to get out, 50 days a year, 30 years in a row. That's a lot of, that's like, 1,500 fishing days? That's a lot of time on the water. I've got guide friends who are in their 50s, a couple fishing buddies north of 60 now, and all of them who regularly fish, even the ones who don't have the greatest eyesight, they've got to use their reader glasses now. They generally can see their dry flies out in the water just fine because they do it so much. They're out in the water so much that it's a skill that they've honed and developed and kept up with them. Now, again, I'm not saying that you haven't, or I'm not calling your fishing prowess into question at all. This is more of a broad thing for other folks who might be experiencing it and thinking, oh, well, what else do I need to help me see? Definitely do what you need to help you see. Use the high vis stuff, use the glasses, do all of that, but also remember that spotting flies, tracking them down the river is a skill. And the more you do it, the more you practice that skill, the better you're going to be at it. So just remember that aspect of it as well. And that wraps up the Q&A portion of the show this week, folks. Thanks so much for sending your questions in. They really do. They shape the show. I read every single question that gets sent in. Not every question that gets sent in will get read on the show. We get so many more questions than we could ever read, but it gives me a great idea of what's on your mind, what topics you're concerned about, and then I can craft entire shows around that and address the issues. So whether your question gets read on the show or not, keep sending them in because they inform not just the podcast, but they inform a lot of the other content that we do here at VFC. Right? We're here to help y'all live real life. We're here to help you have a great time on the water. And the best way we can do that is if you tell us what you need help with. And that's why those questions are so great. So please keep sending them on in. And speaking of living real life, it's time for the Live Real Life moment. We end the show every week here at Untangled by sharing a story and a picture from folks in the audience who are out there living real life. That's why VFC exists. We want you to get out and make those memories and have that time on the water. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you would like to share with us, there's a link to send those in down in these show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Drew, who writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer and VFC crew, I'm a college student in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I began learning to fly fish this past school year. I had never picked up a fly rod before the summer of 24, and I was excited to try and learn this new and exciting form of fishing. I found the Beginner Masterclass series, and I was hooked. I watched them for hours and absorbed the information like a sponge. It was tough trying to learn to cast out on the water because I had never practiced outside of the few times I tried in my backyard before college, but with your videos and some extra time on the water, I improved quickly. I've been looking into your videos regarding dry fly fishing the most because it looked like the most fun way to catch a fish on the fly. So one morning before class in the fall, I decided to go to my local creek and try to use the right fly formula to catch a trout on a dry fly. I walked the creek for about an hour before I stumbled upon 2 rising rainbows in a pool. At the time, some caddis were hatching, so I tied on an Adams and waded into the creek. On my very first cast, I hooked into my first ever fish on the fly, a beautiful rainbow. As I was fighting the fish, 2 older couples walked by and began to cheer me on. I landed the fish and was congratulated by the couples. One of the older gentlemen even offered to take my photo. He congratulated me on my catch one last time before I released the trout. This experience was unlike any other I've ever had while fishing, and is why I have now invested so much of my time and energy into taking out my friends and finding new hidden gems in the hills. Whether it's a quiet solo morning on a secluded stretch of stream or a rowdy afternoon outing with friends, fly fishing has become much more than a hobby for me. It's become a way of life. Thank you so much for helping to teach me and so many others the ins and outs of the complex world of fly fishing. Tight lines. Drew, this is awesome. I love it. I love that you went fishing before class in the morning, because I'm feeling we're kindred souls, because that's what I did when I was going to college too. I just love it. Everything about this, man. You went out, you just did it. You went out and did it. You watched, you prepped, and then you just went out and experienced it. And that's the magic of it, man. That is living real life in a nutshell. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sending that into us. Appreciate it a ton. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you for being here with us, watching, listening to the show every single week. Helps us out more than you can know. If you want to help us out even more, start sending smoke signals to everybody. Get on that Pony Express. Send carrier pigeons to everyone you know, telling them about the good news that is VFC and Untangled. Word of mouth really helps us as well. So does rating and subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to it. It's going to help us reach more people, help us help more folks live real life, which again is the whole goal of VFC. So until next week, everybody, get out on the water, go find some fish, have some fun, and live real life.